Charter schools, a striking admonition for Little Rock and Arkansas from a frontline soldier. A lopsided vote in Texarkana and the push for anti-discrimination statutes elsewhere. The national scene and the prominent players from Arkansas and holiday driving this weekend. Your mileage may not go up, but your bill is going down. Arkansas Week, next.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
This is Arkansas Week.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for Arkansas Week. Politics, state, local, national, all intertwined, a full half hour. Lance Turner is joining us from Arkansas Business, where he's a reporter and editor. Hal Bass from the Political Science Department at Ouachita Baptist University. Ernie Dumas, an independent journalist, columnist for Arkansas Times. We're going to begin tonight with charter schools, specifically in Little Rock, but by very rapid extension and profound extension, the entire state of Arkansas, and indeed, as Hal Bass mentioned just before the broadcast began, the United States. Hal, the outgoing superintendent of the Little Rock School District, departed his last day as state-appointed superintendent with some pretty stern words about charter schools and their advocates.
Yes, he did. Of course, the Little Rock School District has been in receivership for a while now under state control. And Little Rock has become kind of the epicenter of a growing battle between proponents of public schools and local control of public schools and the expanding charter school movement, which has extraordinary support, financial in particular, from the Walton Family Foundation. And the outgoing superintendent, Baker Curris, registered his discontent with this charter school development at about the same time that the Waltons announced they're going to up the ante in a significant fashion.
9 figures, in
so
fact.
We're kind of looking at a battle royal in central Arkansas that, as you suggest, is going to have repercussions throughout the state and potentially the country. We talk about, in a federal system, states being the laboratories of democracy. What happens in states extend across the country, and Arkansas appears to be very much in a laboratory environment right now.
Ernie, where's this thing going? What's at play here?
Well, of course, the state is in control.
And we should add, this is not Mr. Curris's first warning about charter schools. He spent the past year and a half.
He's been fairly consistent about that. Now, and remember that he was appointed first by the Hutchinson administration. He was after the state took over, the State Board of Education voted to take over the Little Rock School District because of these 5 out of some 30 some odd schools that had not met the standards. So he was handpicked by Johnny Key, the governor's commissioner of education. And I think the idea was maybe he would go along with their ideas about kind of some privatization of the administration of the schools and so forth, but and also charter schools, because he had been on the Little Rock School District Board and had been very outspoken and often very critical of the operation of the Little Rock Public Schools and the administration and so forth. But in this instance, he took over and has done all kind of ploys, overcame a lot of opposition and doubt in the Little Rock School District, and became the teachers and the kind of public school advocates. He became their champion. Everybody loved Baker Curris, and he began to make some progress. But then they fired him because he had come out in opposition to expansion of the charter schools, and he since then has become more and more and more outspoken. And by the way, was joined last week by the state-appointed superintendent of the Pulaski County School District,
yes,
which was also had been taken over some years earlier.
Mr. Guess.
Jerry Guess, and he also joined almost as if they were writing from on the same page, talking about you can't operate, the schools can't afford to operate two separate school districts, and that's basically why you'll have a charter school district that is not bound by the rules and regulations, and then you got the public schools that are. And of course, Baker Curris's thesis and also Jerry Guess's thesis is that these charter schools typically pull from the kind of the more elite students, white and more involved African American students whose parents are more involved. So they just set two separate school districts. So it's a big battle, and it's hard to see how anybody can win except the state. They hold all the cards. The governor and the commissioner of education, they own the Little Rock School District now. So they can do whatever they like, but so it's going to be a battle. And and they've appointed now a new superintendent to replace Baker Curris, and nobody knows what Mr. Michael Poore, what his take is on charter schools. He's been a great PR man since he's here. He pleases everybody. He's well spoken, but he doesn't give a clue about what he thinks about charter schools and this particular argument.
Yeah, to reemphasize, we're talking specifically about the Little Rock and the Pulaski County District, but as Hal noted, this is just read the paper. I mean, we have charters blossoming in other parts of the state as well, and lands across the country as well. You get a read on the business community. It has to be a pretty profound division. And
profound division. Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously you've got. I mean, when you talk about business in Arkansas, I mean, Walton's and Walmart. I mean, that's a major component of that environment. And there are. Obviously, when it comes to economic development in a city or a state too, I mean, schools play an integral role in that. So you're going to have folks on all sides of the school's issue trying to determine what's best for your city in terms of a good economic and attractive economic environment for business and education. The Waltons, though, have been emphatic that they are kind of behind this charter effort, and as we sort of alluded to at the beginning of the program, $250 million the Walton Family Foundation appropriated this week to 17 cities, so cities across the country, including Little Rock, just to help them in terms of facilities to get physical spaces to grow these schools. And their goal, very explicitly stated, is to, by the year 2017 or 2027, expand enrollment in charter schools in these areas by 250,000. So, there is a lot of power behind this movement, and that's a side of the equation that we're seeing play out in sort of microcosm in Little Rock.
And the great argument is, of course, by the charter school advocates, the charter schools do a better job, and particularly do a better job with the underprivileged kids who are the ones that are keeping the scores down and the achievement record low. But the argument is, there are people on the other side said, no, charter schools do a worse job with those kids. And
they at least don't do any better.
Don't do any better, and often worse, and that they don't make a major contribution to the overall achievement levels of the schools. So that the kids who go there do no better there than they did when they were in the public schools. So anyway, this argument is going to go on and on, and as I say, I think in the case of Little Rock, the state has the upper hand here.
Moving on, we had a vote this past week in Texarkana. Hal, it was an anti-discrimination ordinance that had been, no bones about it, it was designed to benefit or to insulate, I guess you would say, protect the LGBT community in Texarkana, unanimously approved by the city council and overwhelmingly crushed in a referendum by the electorate.
4-1. The context here is we've seen some recent developments that have clearly advanced, both socially and legally, the status of the LGBT community. And these developments have met some resistance from public opinion in certain particular settings, particularly here in the South. So the Texarkana incident fits into this broad context in a fairly predictable fashion here. It's clear that there are substantial pockets that are out of sync with the national tides, but it's also in a broader sense couple of interesting questions are emerging. One is kind of a redefinition of religious liberty, as we're seeing the proponents of, if you will, the old order, relying on the constitutional provisions guaranteeing free exercise of religion as an authorization to avoid moving in the new directions. But you're also seeing a conflict between what I'd call the expectations associated with representative democracy and this associated with direct democracy, as we see these popular majorities in particular settings reacting against the actions of the authorized representatives, be they councils, legislatures, courts, whatever, and demanding a direct say in the policy outcome.
Yeah, this was a measure that had been approved unanimously by the Texarkana, Arkansas City Council previously, and then there was enough opposition within the community that it was referred back to the people, and then the people, of course, as we've seen, overturned it. It is interesting, and we talk about business interests. Business interests, and not so much. I don't know so much about what's going on in Texarkana in terms of what business there wants, but in other parts of the state, and when it came to the state law that drew quite a bit of controversy and attention last year, business was very much on the side of openness and inclusion and non-discrimination because they see it as good for business. And so you had big names like Walmart here in Arkansas, and then major international companies like Apple and others using their economic might to try to influence public policy, saying, if you guys are going to discriminate against a certain group in your population, we're going to reconsider what investments we may make in your local economy. So the people and then big business on opposite sides again.
Yeah, indeed, you saw that very thing in Georgia, a deep South state, earlier this year. Well, enter the third branch of government, which is where so much of this legislation is dashed. Indeed, in the closing hours of Thursday night, there was a U.S. district judge, I think, in Mississippi, that quashed what many people viewed as a fairly pinched state law there. And earlier in the week, Indiana lost. But typically when these things reach the courts, particularly the federal courts, they lose.
Well, again, the legal jurisprudence is looking increasingly clear at the federal level, and it's forcing a reconsideration, particularly on this religious liberty issue. Because historically, the religious liberty claims that have been advanced, the free exercise claims, have been associated with popular minorities against majoritarian sentiments. What we're now seeing is an effort by at least local majorities to insulate themselves from what they see as the unrepresentative claims of the political elites. And again, I think if we simply see it in judicial terms, I think the national trend is increasingly clear.
Pretty obvious.
Yeah, and this has played out in Arkansas as well. The Texarkana story Little Rock passed a non-discriminatory discrimination, and it is held up. It hasn't been a popular referendum. Fayetteville, on the other hand, in northwest Arkansas, a fairly progressive community, there the city council adopted a non-discrimination ordinance. There's a petition drive, and the voters overturned it there, not by the kind of margin they did at Texarkana. And then they came back and drafted another one, and this time it was approved by the voters as well. So that's kind of the trend, and I don't know that will happen at Texarkana, but and that's not likely to go to court because what goes to court are these statutes and ordinances that require discrimination or permit discrimination. And those have just uniformly been struck down and will continue to be because the law is, as it says, jurisprudence is very clear, particularly after the same-sex marriage case came down and even before, that you cannot discriminate. It's against the Constitution. So that's where things are headed, and this battle is going to carry out for another couple of years.
Well, another battle, speaking of the federal judiciary, was settled in Arkansas, would appear to be held this past week when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in an abortion case, which effectively nullified one state statute. Yeah, got another one that's been enjoined.
And what's been going on here is that opponents of legal abortion who understand that, at least for the time being, Roe versus Wade is settled law, have been engaged at the state level, state legislative level, in some backdoor maneuvers to effectively limit the incidence of abortion by focusing less on the abstract right and more on the conditions under which abortion providers can operate. So we're seeing an increasingly strong set of regulations established that effectively limit the capacity of these abortion providers to function. And what happened in a Texas-based case was that the court ruled by a clear majority, 5-3, that the Texas restrictions do in fact establish an unacceptable burden on a woman's right to get an abortion, and thus were struck down, and Arkansas is going to be vulnerable on that front.
Well, the Arkansas law is, some provisions are similar to Texas, and the federal judge here already has struck that down, and that is on appeal to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals at St. Louis, and it's hard to imagine that the Eighth Circuit, given the precedence on the matter, will not uphold her decision, and the Arkansas law will be invalid. The Attorney General keeps appealing it, and she has not said whether she would continue that appeal, although in the face of almost certain defeat and costly litigation, the state ultimately will have to pay the attorney fees for the winning side in that. And then there's also the same federal judge in Mississippi yesterday also kind of struck down one aspect of the Mississippi abortion law as well. So that's going on all across the country. And so I think in the next, barring some change on the Supreme Court, that there's another couple of changes on the Supreme Court the next couple of years, things could turn around. But that's the future, because this was a very firm decision. Yeah. It was the toughest decision almost since Roe v. Wade.
Yeah. Our presidential nominees, both of them, we voted for both of the nominees. By the time he got to Phoenix, he was eager for some conversation, Hal. So
Sure. What's going on here?
Yeah.
Is we're seeing that Bill Clinton is a mixed blessing for the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. He brings an enormous skill set to the table and an ability to establish rapport with some constituencies with whom she has struggled, but he also brings some baggage and, it seems, a capacity for controversy. And the latest one involved a chance meeting on an airport tarmac in Phoenix, where he, awaiting departure, found out that the current Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, had a plane on the tarmac, and he stopped by to say hello. And this private meeting aroused enormous controversy in light of the ongoing FBI investigation associated with the State Department handling of emails, particularly the private email server of former Secretary Clinton. And the question I come to here is, or the perspective I bring to this is, what we're seeing here is just how strongly, one, polarization, but two, new ethics norms have affected politicians doing business. Once upon a time, in a galaxy not so far away, it was assumed that there was a political community that talked to each other formally and casually and without a great stigma associated with it. But over the past generation, and Clinton's had plenty of time to get accustomed to this, the norms have changed and changed dramatically. And appearances of impropriety are very much to be avoided, and he didn't.
Well, this is just astonishing that he, as you said, that he would make this mistake, because he's had fair warning. And
Big Dog has a long tail.
He does, and I would love to.
Clears the table of the china.
I'd say I would love to hear the conversation when Hillary hears about this and calls him up, and what she said to him after this incident, because it had to be one of the worst conversations he's ever had. But this is not the first time this happened. But remember back in 2008 when she was running against Barack Obama, he made some remarks down in South Carolina or Georgia, someplace down there, somewhat kind of racist remarks or something, but that could be construed that way. And he was deep trouble over that, and I'm sure she told him off about it. But this, given the email controversy, is devastating, I think. And he had to know that. And I'm sure he went on the approach. I'm sure he will say, I had no intention of even trying to influence her on this email controversy. But you say he just went over there to say hello. Apparently it was his initiative to do that. He goes over to the plane and climbs the stairs, and goes in and hi Loretta, and I'm sure they didn't talk about the email controversy, but he knew what he was doing, and he just wanted to say hello and be liked.
Took a bit of the shine off what was otherwise a pretty good week for Mrs. Clinton. That was, I don't think we're at the point where it's Bernie who, but when you have Elizabeth Warren dancing all over the stage and delivering this fiery speech in Mrs. Clinton's behalf, that's
it was a relatively good week, and Bernie Sanders is sort of all but vanquished. A relatively good tour for Hillary and Elizabeth Warren, making some pretty great campaign stops and really appealing to that sort of, or attempting to appeal to that sort of base that Bernie Sanders had really rallied. Elizabeth Warren is an icon of the Democratic left, and they love her, and so there's obviously some calculation there to sort of bring people into the fold, unite the party. So yeah, it was a great week. Benghazi, the final report on Benghazi came out. Again, not much there that's bad for Hillary Clinton. So a good resolution there. It's a spoiler for a good week, because really this airplane incident really plays into Donald Trump's crooked Hillary mantra, and he's going to keep repeating that over and over again. He already has been, but this really feeds into the fire that there's corruption going on, that Bill Clinton is trying to influence the Attorney General over what they're going to find with the emails, and so the Attorney General this week is having to kind of come out and say, whatever the FBI recommends in terms of what I should do, I'm going to question, hands off. I'm not going to try to influence that. Even still, I think either way on the email situation, there's going to be some damage to mitigate for Hillary Clinton, and so not good on the tarmac for the Clinton
There's
campaign.
image issues and there's substance issues. Substantively, I still don't think this is that big a deal, but the image is what's devastating. Fact of the matter was, the Attorney General was not in a position to ignore the recommendations of prosecutors when they come down. She was going to do what she says. Now, but it looks like she's being forced to by the appearance of impropriety and controversy, as opposed to normal, bureaucratic processes.
On to the other side, the other nominee that Arkansas supported, the Republicans have their party starting in, about 10 days. Hal, looks to be quite a party.
Well, it really does. Looks
Great
to be.
TV,
Yeah,
I'm sure.
It's going to be an adventure. Trump has demonstrated his capacity for spectacle, and it continues on to Cleveland. And here again, there's Arkansas connections, either there and yon. I think on the Veep stake side of it, while I don't think Cotton is quite the hot property he was a week ago, he's going to be able to meet the press tomorrow. He's still, in the picture there. I think you see an announcement this week that I think it's going to be Bud Cummings and Gilbert Baker have been designated as the Arkansas delegation liaisons with the Trump campaign. It's interesting that while Governor Hutchinson has announced his endorsement of Donald Trump, he's kept a pretty low profile in keeping with so many of his counterparts across the state and nation. And that makes Mike Huckabee's position more interesting, because in contrast, Mike Huckabee is very much front and center in promoting Trump and positioning himself as kind of a mediator with the evangelical community. And
his daughter works over there.
His daughter works over there very effectively, and has been I think, an effective spokesman for Trump with national media.
Yeah. Gas prices. You traveling?
Looking pretty good, yeah. I think if you're going to go out this weekend and take a road trip, you can maybe set aside some extra time because gas prices seem to be at a low that we haven't seen in several years. We're definitely down. We're down about 50 cents in terms of the national average from what we were last year.
Lance, is this global production, domestic production? Is it demand? What's driving?
Well, some of it too. I think some of it is the global scene because we're seeing some producers really cut back on production, well, I think that sort of portends that prices could go up. But I think right now it's sort of a mixture of things. But refineries are sort of increasing their output here domestically, and I think through the rest of the year it looks like we could have $2 gas around Thanksgiving. The AAA is saying this week, so it's looking pretty good.
And what makes it look even more fortuitous is that the concerns about air travel are on the rise in light of the terrorist incidents, which makes traveling by auto a far more attractive option, gas prices notwithstanding.
However you're traveling this weekend, be safe. Thanks to you guys for coming in. As always, thanks to you for watching. See you next week.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.